¿Aló? Okay. ¿Y esto sigue duro? Okay. Good morning, dear participants, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome to CAF's COP26, the side event on climate change, an umbrella for livelihoods in coastal marine areas and island territories. It is my pleasure to be the moderator for this side event. And I wanted to talk to you, to tell you the side event, why it was conceived, taking into account that from CAF in the climate change unit, we have been working in adaptation since 2012, and with different proposals, projects, studies in coastal zones. For example, we have a vulnerability analysis and developing adaptation action plans in Ecuador with Guayaquil, Santa Cruz of Galapagos, and with Esmeraldas. In Colombia, we have been working with Monteria, and in Brazil with Recife and Fortaleza. In Peru, we have also been working with Trujillo, and in Chile with Atacama, Taltal, Valdivia, Valparaíso, and Viña del Mar. And right now, we are working with Trinidad and Tobago with a territorial zone in South Arapuch River. From these studies and projects, CAF has learned importance on understanding coastal zones as a whole territory and not in differentiated it, where climate change threats as heavy rains and correlative floods, coastal erosion, landslides, hillsides, and all of the storage of water resources and water scarcity, salinity of estuaries, and agricultural soils, acidification of the oceans, increase in surface temperature, causes direct impacts not only in one of the sectors, but in the whole territory, taking into account housing, fisheries, agriculture, energy, mobility, water, tourism, services, and education. That's the reason why we want to start working on climate, on coastal territories as a whole, holistic territory. For this, the idea of today is to have a nice conversation between the GCF, CAF, and different countries that we would like to start working, or we have been already working with, such as Ecuador, Colombia, or Barbados. I'm now inviting to Ubaldo Elizondo, Climate Change Coordinator of CAF, of Latin American Development Bank, to give us some introduction and words. Ubaldo, please.
Thank you, Carolina. Good morning to everyone, and thank you for being here at this side event. With the topic of coastal marine areas and island territories. As Carolina mentioned, this is a very important topic for our region, Latin America. We, at CAF, we are a Latin American Development Bank, established 50 years ago, in the beginning with a very clear mandate for Andean region. Only 5 countries were part of CAF, and now we have extended our reach to almost 19 countries in Latin America and the Caribbean, and also Spain and Portugal, which are partners of our Latin mandate. As Carolina already mentioned, coastal lines are an important part and territory of our region, with Latin America and Caribbean having approximately 230,000 linear kilometers of coastline between the Pacific and the Caribbean. The boundaries of coastal regions encompass coastline, defined as the physical transition between the sea and land, the adjacent terrestrial system that affect the sea, and the marine ecosystems affected by the proximity to land. These physical characteristics are explanatory of the uses that take place in the area, and therefore of the uniqueness of most of the socioeconomic activities that happen here. Fishing, aquaculture, transport, and logistic activities linked to the maritime trade, coastal tourism, among others, are fully related to the physical environment that support them. As global climate change intensifies, there are a range of impacts that will directly affect the development of these zones. Climate change produces changes in the wind regime, alterations in their intensity, direction, or persistence have direct implications on other physical processes such as waves, meteorological tides, current systems, or coastal upwelling. Changes in waves can have effects on coastal ecosystems since, in addition to erosion, they can alter current patterns, modifying sediment transport, or lead to extreme events that exceed the survival threshold of some species. Sea surface temperatures have been increasing significantly during the last decades, affecting more than 70% of coasts in the world. This increase in temperature has several consequences: changes in stratification and circulation, increased bleaching episodes, mortality of coral reefs, and changes in some of the species' migration patterns. Other important factors is that this increase in temperature is also associated with extreme events known as marine heat waves. This problem may be specifically relevant in the Pacific region of Latin America and the Caribbean, since effects like El Niño events induce this type of phenomenon. It is evident that adaptation measures are necessary to maintain or reduce risk levels or increase the resilience of coasts in the face of changes induced by climate change or extreme events. CAF, as a development bank of Latin America and the Caribbean, has the opportunity to be a strategic partner to the region by investing in the coastal marine areas through blue economy and marine conservation, terrestrial conservation and development of intelligent rurality, climate change adaptation and mitigation activities, and sustainable tourism. What do we expect as results from this investment and this support? Increased knowledge, cultures, research, and innovation on oceans to contribute to the social appropriation of bio-oceanic region. Multi-sectoral interventions where the territory and its people are the basis for the development of economic activities. Maritime economic activities and a local coastal development that contributes to the productive and social development of the region. As Carolina already mentioned, in the last years we have worked with different countries in different programs and studies related exclusively to climate change and coastal zones. As you mentioned, in Ecuador, we have been helping some of the cities develop their vulnerability index and identified climate change actions. We are implementing a project to reduce climate vulnerability and flood risk in coastal, urban, and semi-urban areas, with a very specific focus on coastal cities with resources from the Adaptation Fund. We are also working in the development of a program in Galapagos to be presented to the Green Climate Fund with a multi-sectoral approach which includes agriculture, fisheries, energy transition, terrestrial and marine conservation, and tourism. In Trinidad and Tobago, we are working on a Tobago Coastal Protection Program to promote the productive diversification of Tobago through sustainable tourism via the recovery and reconstruction of coastal infrastructure and associated works. This $15 million US program will seek to recover and rebuild the coastal infrastructure, prepare an action plan for the development and management of safe and environmentally sustainable coastal infrastructure, and incorporate a strategy for tourism management, coastal protection, and conservation of protected areas. Also in Trinidad and Tobago, we are developing a project for Adaptation Fund, which has already received the endorsement of the Adaptation Fund Board for the concept note. This is a project on multi-sectoral adaptation measures in the South Oropouche Basin for river flood relief, with the idea to increase the resilience of the basin through adaptation measures in the water, agriculture, and fishing sectors, protection of commercial and residential buildings, and ecosystem restoration. Finally, I would like to confirm CAF's idea to strengthen its position in the Caribbean. In the words of our president, Mr. Sergio Díaz-Granados, we are going to establish a regional hub in our Trinidad and Tobago office for the Caribbean region with a clear focus on climate change and environmental and conservational issues. With this, I would like to thank you for being part of this panel, hoping that you can have a great discussion with colleagues from the Green Climate Fund, colleagues representing the countries on different initiatives that they are implementing on coastal protection and climate change. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Ubaldo. Now I'm inviting Mr. Henry Gonzalez, please, to the stand. Mr. Gonzalez is the director of the Green Climate Fund private sector facility and has over 25 years of professional experience across sustainable and impact investing, emerging markets, and political and economic development. Thank you very much, Mr. Gonzalez, and for your participation here.
Thank you for the invitation. It's a pleasure.
Okay. Then I have two questions for you, basically. And one is, as the GCF is willing to enhance climate action in coastal zones, could you please share how does the GCF expect these initiatives to be presented to the fund?
Sure. So currently the GCF has around $10 billion of capital that we have already channeled in 190 initiatives that have impacted 127 countries. Latin America and the Caribbean is a very special and important region. In regards to ecosystem-based solutions that include coastal and marine opportunities, we have invested around $2.5 billion. So about 25% of those investments have had some sort of nature-based, ecosystem-based solution. Now, I would say that we are trying to innovate and work in initiatives that are, I would say, more creative, trying to work in areas like coral reef. So in the last board meeting, we approved the investment window of the Coral Reef Fund, which is a $500 million private equity fund, where GCF provided $125 million of junior equity, with the idea of crowding private capital. This Coral Reefs Fund also has a technical assistance window, or a grant window that would also support the different initiatives. When we work in initiatives like Coral Reef, we're trying to work across different sectors. So we try to work with sustainable oceans, sustainable ecotourism, and we want to work also with resilient infrastructure. So one angle in regards to new initiatives that are coming our way is we want the initiatives to have an adaptation component, that it's not just mitigation. While mitigation is an important element, we're trying to look for at least cross-cutting mitigation and adaptation, but hopefully more adaptation. As a mandate, our fund has to have a 50-50 split between adaptation and mitigation. We're not so far, because overall is 52 mitigation, 48 adaptation. But if you look at the private sector facility that I represent, it's not that split. If you look at the global flows of private capital into adaptation, is around 5%. Of all flows going into climate, only 5% is private sector adaptation. Very, very incipient. And this is exactly why the mandate of GCF is so important, because we're here to de-risk. We're here to demonstrate. We're here to take risks that no one else is willing to take. And hopefully that would catalyze and crowding more private capital. As it was said before, CAF has actually also presented innovative projects, as has also CABE in Central America and other parts, where, for example, we just actually received a proposal on the Galapagos Island that actually today in Korea had the first approval of the first committee. So now it's going to be going to the next committee of approval. So it's in the pipeline. So if countries are looking into working with us, as you know, we have a very strong country ownership. So we work with our national determined authorities, and we have to work with designated accredited entities, and we then will be bringing those projects. I'm very pleased to have among those that are going to be speak after me 3 countries that we have strong partnerships. So in Barbados, our Director General was recently in a meeting with the Prime Minister, and the Prime Minister is an amazing champion along all of this. So there's been a lot of requests to look into resilient infrastructure, to look into green banks or green financial. So I'm going to be engaged with the Barbados team, with Ecuador, as I just mentioned. You know, we have been working in this possibility of doing something in the Galapagos, but we've also, Ecuador is part of the Coral Reef project that we have been working with Colombia as well. We're working on your current country strategy as we speak. I was in your pavilion with Santiago, exchanging on how to best work together. So this is like, we are bottom up, we are country driven. We want to crowd in the private sector. We want to do more in adaptation. And our focus is going to be on small island development states and least developed countries. So we would certainly work in middle income countries, but we also need to have a rationale of the additionality that our capital brings, because we don't want to crowd out other investors who should be there. So that's a little bit how we are looking at initiatives around these lines. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mr. Gonzalez. Taking into account that you're mentioning that you are willing to work much more in adaptation, and from the private sector also to start working with that, with those objectives. From our experience in CAF, these territories don't have that much information, data information. And for us, for example, for Galapagos to get that information, the climate information, it was not that easy, all of the scenarios. So we have been working also with the Adaptation Fund in a trend on a bottom-up vulnerability analysis, not only taking into account their database, but what's a risk understood by the communities. So I don't know if would this bottom-up perspective analysis, evidence-based, would be possible for the GCF to accept it?
Sure. One of the other characteristics beyond country-driven is climate rationale. So we indeed have, I would say, demands on justify the climate rationale, both in mitigation and adaptation. We have a group of scientists who are flexible, and we are trying to work together so they understand that the realities of our countries are very heterogeneous. The development of criteria, the development of baseline indicators, that is very different from country to country depending on the capacities. The Caribbean is one area where we are trying to provide a lot of capacity. So we are working, we have several tools that we could work. We have, to start, we have what we call Readiness Program. This is a window where each country has $1 million a year that they could tap into in order to increase capacity. Capacity of the entities, capacity of the different accredited entities. And here it's important because this is an opportunity to somehow start either working and engaging with taxonomies, working and engaging with different potential methodologies that hopefully will be suitable. We also have another element that we call the project preparation facility, and that is that if you are developing a project, and that project might be early in its early development, and you want to engage with more information and have a little bit of a feedback loop with us, that is a great opportunity, because through that facility, we will be able to have a more robust financial proposal that when it is presented to us, it's going to go through the process a lot quicker. So we have some of those elements to provide that sort of capacity building. Now, on the investment side, we like to sometimes bring investments in bundled. So we bring capacity plus capital. So that means that while we might be investing in private equity or private debt, we could also have a grant window of technical assistance to continue supporting some of these efforts. So we are cognizant of the potential limitations, and we're trying to use certain methodologies, center access for you to be able to improve. Now, the one thing that I hope little by little will continue developing is to have more standardized methodologies. To have methodologies that sometimes people could use, if it's not obviously all regions, but maybe certain countries with similar characteristics. If it's the Caribbean, or if it is the Andean or Central America. So obviously we need to understand each country's context, but if there is an opportunity to also start having, standards that would make it a lot more feasible, I think that would be ideal, because otherwise we'll be over-fragmenting this part of the business cycle and will become very expensive and very burdensome. We're starting. We're not there yet. I think we have gone further on mitigation. As you know, mitigation is the low-hanging fruit in climate finance. Adaptation is a lot more complex, but we're willing to sort of make that extra effort.
Okay, thank you very much. And I would, taking into account what Ubaldo said about having a hub in Trinidad and Tobago for CAF, for the Caribbean, and I'm not mentioning the Caribbean, it's not only Caribbean islands, but also for us is all of the coastal line from Colombia, Venezuela, Panama, Costa Rica. We are always trying to decide if in adaptation, of course, to have proposals that are local or to have proposals that are regional, and to make this in a local perspective. That's not easy, because we have to think global but to act locally, and that's what we are always thinking in CAF. We are a regional agency, but of course we also need to know, and what you were saying, there's very specific details for every country with all the information, and well, making the standards, it would be easier, but even though in the Caribbean we have different kind of countries. So maybe, I don't know if it's good to have local or regional.
That's a great question, and I don't think there's one size fits all, and I think this is important to just know. We currently work with national projects, regional projects, and global projects. We have entities that we have accredited at the direct access level, which is national. We have identified regional access entities, and we have also global access entities. I would say that here it depends on several factors. The first is the alignment across the countries on the theory of change of what this project is willing to do. If there's alignment, and indeed this is something that is going to be addressing bottlenecks that are common into the countries, maybe a regional project is better, because it is indeed a way of syndicating efforts and amplifying efforts. If a project has extremely idiosyncratic elements that is very localized, and that might not be replicated elsewhere, better to have a national project. Then what we are now seeing in the multi-country projects, which are mostly programs, not projects, is that, like, for example, this one that we just approved in the Coral Reef, it includes 17 countries. And 17 countries that has, Caribbean seats, Pacific seats, African seats, Latin America, Asia, Africa. So we were able to really originate. Now, remember that a lot of times the countries that we incorporate into our proposals have already given us a no objection letter, which aligns our project to their climate strategy and hopefully to their NDCs. But sometimes it does not mean that funding will go to all of those countries equally, because it also depends on the bankable projects that we're able to find, especially on the private sector side. So it's really important to also manage expectations and for people to understand that the selection of a country is only part of a universe of investable opportunities, but we are depending on the bankable projects that we're able to help the risk and make the investments. So I think, you know, the good thing is that it's not one opportunity, there are several, but it's important to see how do we make this feasible, how do we make this pragmatically operational, and how do we avoid overcomplicating. GCF is a bit of a complex entity to work with. I would like to acknowledge that. I've only been there for 2 months, but I have already seen. And I think a lot of the DFIs, we are also complicated in one way or another. And there are expectations for us to be a lot more agile. And especially as I work with the private sector, it's hard for the private sector to understand that it takes 2 years to get accredited, or that it takes a couple of years to get a process from ideation to implementation. But the good side is that we're there for the long run. We are long-term partners, and we provide large ticket sizes. And we are providing junior equity, or we're providing catalytic capital that no one else is providing. So even when we work with CAF, we take even a more junior position than CAF because we have that appetite, and we were created to do that. So there's always an opportunity to understand each other and hopefully just look and always make our transactions and our deals, you know, people-centric. We're here working for the smallholder farmer, for the fishing village. We're trying to help their lives improve and hopefully make their life more resilient. Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much, Mr. Gonzalez. Everybody. Ya. Ok. Listo, vale. Okay. After the announcement, I would like to know if there's any question for Mr. Gonzalez.
Yes, I would like to excuse myself because there is a ministerial meeting that I need to attend, so I will not be able to stay. So if you have any question, I'm happy to answer it. If not, you would have 3 great speakers coming after me. They will continue contributing to this very interesting panel.
Okay, thank you very much.
By the way, I'm from Costa Rica, so I'm very invested in this region.
Okay, then I would like to invite now the governments from Ecuador, Colombia, and Barbados. We are having Rosana Gonzalez. She's the Climate Change Adaptation Specialist at the Ministry of Environment, Water, and Ecological Transition from Ecuador. We have Alex Jose Saer. He has worked in the Ministry of Environment and Sustainable Development in Colombia since 2019, firstly as Director of Sectoral and Urban Affairs, where he led the formulation and implementation of the Natural Circular Economy Strategy, and now he's the Director of the Climate Change and Risk Management Division. Thank you, both of you. And we have Karima Degia. She is an experienced coastal zone management and coastal engineer professional with wide-ranging and multidisciplinary experience and interest. She's a research associate and project manager at the Center of Resource Management and Environmental Studies at the University of Western Indies. So thank you very much, Karima. Thank you, Alex. Thank you, Rosa. Unfortunately, because of negotiations, we are missing Trinidad and Tobago, but still we have a great panel right now with us. And I would like to start the conversation with the 3 of you on how's your country perspective, which is the most relevant issue you can mention to develop in coastal marine zones. So I'm going to first give you the word, Karima. Thank you very much again.
Thank you. Thank you for inviting me. It's a pleasure to be here. I think what I want to do, rather than focusing on a narrow coastal issue, is to highlight the complexity of coastal zones for small islands. Our coastlines are very much longer relative to our land area. And the coastal zone is already complex with multiple issues and complex interactions. But when you add that small island factor, how long our coastlines are relative to our land areas, that amplifies the complexity of the coastal zone. It amplifies coastal issues for us. And so I think the main thing with the coastal zone for us as small islands is this balancing act that we have to juggle those issues and that added complexity from being a small island. And Barbados adds to that just by, I was so happy to hear acknowledgement of the uniqueness of the individual countries in the region. Barbados is densely developed. It's one of the most densely populated countries in the world. Its natural environment is highly modified. We're at the very edge of the Atlantic, exposed to very high energy sea conditions. These unique factors add to the complexity of coastal zone management for us. And so I think that the main issue is really the delicacy of that balancing act that we have that involves prioritizing, making decisions, and trade-offs among all of those complex interactions.
Okay, I like the word delicacy because for Colombia, I think we are experiencing right now, since last year, new episodes in the Caribbean. So I don't know, for Colombia, what do you think about, or where it's the main issue right now, taking into account the Caribbean is really having issues, problems right now with climate change?
No, I think that what you mentioned, complexity, is really important. Since, for example, in Colombia, we have really big cities in the coastal area like Barranquilla, Cartagena, Santa Marta. We have, and San Andres Island as well. And we have, in this complex area, it's really important how to manage that complexity, because you have many actors, industry, commerce, fishermen, local communities. You have also many interests between these many actors that are in these coastal areas. And you have like a gap, an important gap of knowledge between these actors. So trying to develop some planning and some plans on how to develop adaptive measurements or mitigation measurements, you have to put into the table these different actors. And it's really difficult to come up with collaborative solutions when you have a tremendous gaps between, for example, industrials, ports, and local communities. So that's a really high challenge that we have in Colombia. For example, in Cartagena, we are trying to develop a restoration plan for Cartagena Bay, and you have many interests into the table. For example, you have one area that we call it Varadero, which is the entry of the Cartagena Bay, and you have some coral reefs there. So the ports industry want to, build another canal into the bay, but the communities want the coral reefs to stay. So there is a gap, really like a really large gap, and make up with an agreement there is really difficult. So I think that there is a challenge on how you manage all these interests and how you manage all these different problems that the coastal areas have. No, that's.
Thank you very much, Alex. And Rosa, you are part of the Pacific area, so there are different, completely different types of vulnerability. But as we have been working with Ecuador, like 3 or 4 years ago, we started with Galapagos Islands, with Guayaquil, and also in Esmeraldas. However, what do you think it's for the Ministry of Environment, one of these tipping points to address right now with coastal zones.
Yes. Thank you, Carolina, for the invitation. It's a pleasure to be here with the colleagues. I have heard the issues that you just have pointed, and it's interesting because we share some of them, most of them, I could say. And in Ecuador, also I can mention that the change of the land use is very important. Always these several actors that we have in the coastal regions that need to have a joint position about the management of the cities is very important, and also is a lack for the management of the coastal region. Now in Ecuador we have developed, as Carolina mentioned before, some studies about the vulnerability, the assessment of the vulnerability that show these issues in our country that are the important issues that doesn't let us have a deep work with the communities.
Okay, thank you very much. And yes, again, I would like to know if you can provide us, for examples of adaptation or mitigation specific in your territory. Karim.
Happy to. I'm going to focus on adaptation. I was very happy to hear the interest in pursuing more adaptation for us as small island developing states, and I'm sure my colleagues from Trinidad and Tobago would second this. Adaptation really has to be our priority. We're not significant contributors to climate change, but we must adapt to what is happening that is beyond our control. So for Barbados, we are combining, the policy, the planning, the data collection, and then following that with intervention. And what we're really trying to do here is to optimize the coordination and the coherence between those things under the framework of our flagship program, the Roofs to Reefs program, which is bringing that connectivity and that coherence across policy, planning, data collection, and then intervention. We've heard a lot about the Roofs to Reefs program, so I'm going to sort of drill down a little bit into how it works with coastal zone management in Barbados. Part of what the program is going to be doing is operationalizing our physical development plan. That is an overarching policy and planning document that sets out plans for sustainable development, resilience, and adaptation for Barbados. So the Roofs to Reefs operationalizes that. At the next level, we have an integrated coastal zone management plan that is integrated into that overarching national planning. We are currently seeking to develop a marine spatial plan, which extends the current terrestrial spatial planning out to the full extent of our EEZ, which as a small island, our exclusive economic zone is actually over 400 times the size of our land area. So that marine spatial planning for that full EEZ is going to be very important for us going forward. So that's the policy and the spatial planning aspects of it. We've also had a number of important programs that are combining planning and implementation. So we've had a coastal risk assessment and management program that has included developing baseline studies, updating our coastal zone management plan to factor in climate change adaptation and disaster risk management, but it's also included coastal infrastructure interventions. It's included coastal protection. It's included ecosystem-based adaptation in terms of coral restocking to restock degraded coral reefs. It's also developed a national coastal risk information and planning platform, which is a software platform that supports development decisions about physical development based on mapping of exposure, vulnerability, and risk to various coastal hazards. Alongside that, we've not ignored the ridge to reef issues. As a small island, it's particularly important. We are essentially almost entirely a coastal zone. So we have an integrated storm water management plan looking at those ridge to reef issues and the delivery of storm water to the marine environment that is of better quality and reduces land-based sources of pollution. We're also looking at this being very science-based. A lot of these programs we've had combine study and data collection with implementation so that the implementation is science and data-driven. We're also in partnership. I am actually with the University of the West Indies, like you said. And so we've got a really good partnership with the Roof to Reefs program, looking at the exposure to the sargassum seaweed influxes, as well as the Macobios project, which is an EU-funded project looking at the feasibility of nature-based solutions. So that's going to allow us to provide some practical applied science in terms of the feasibility of nature-based solutions, in terms of taking a holistic look at the natural systems that we have and adding a layer of mapping showing where and how and why nature-based solutions will be suitable in Barbados, so that we're not just implementing sort of cookie-cutter projects, or we're really looking at making this customized to Barbados. What type of nature-based solutions do we need? Where are they appropriate? How do we fit them into our highly modified natural environment? How do we hybridize? We have a lot of gray infrastructure already. We have limited space. So how do we create gray and green hybrids that deliver ecosystem services, but also deliver the benefits of those engineered solutions? So there's a lot of data collection and spatial planning that is going forward in a practical manner to then inform implementation. And the Roof to Reefs program is bringing that all together to ensure that coherence, so that implementation follows planning, which flows from policy. And so that is just sort of, I could speak on a lot more individual programs, but that I think is an overview of how everything fits together for Barbados.
Okay, great. Yes, as you said, Roof to Reef, it's getting, we are seeing that it's more popular every time, and so it's interesting. Thank you very much. Alex, I don't know, from Colombia, do you have any projects or that you could mention in adaptation and in coastal areas?
Yeah. In fact, we had, like last year in Colombia, we had the first time that we have a Category 5 hurricane in one of our islands. Providencia Island get hit by the Hurricane Iota last year, and all like 98% of all the infrastructure was destroyed by the hurricane. That means all the houses, 98% of the houses, hospitals, and every public building that was in Providencia was hit and was destroyed by the Iota hurricane. So that poses a really high challenge. We are still reconstructing Providencia right now, and what we found is that the island was not prepared for a big hurricane as Iota hit last year. So we started developing some recovery measures, also taking into account adaptation characteristics. For example, houses has been built or rebuilt, but taking account using other materials, using structural materials instead of other kind of materials that they had before. In fact, in Providencia, even though that 98% of the infrastructure was destroyed, the casualties of the hurricane were minimum, because people were they keep themselves in their bathrooms that were the only place in their house that was built with construction material like cement or concrete or something like that. So, but in the other way, not only on the infrastructure, but we have been working to restore the ecosystems that also were destroyed by the hurricane. And we came up with this program called 1 Million Corals. So we are doing coral restoration and coral farming in Providencia, San Andres, and we are amplifying this project in other areas of the Caribbean that has coral reefs as Baru in Cartagena. So coral reefs can make up as a mitigation strategy, but also as an adaptation strategy, because when you farm corals and restore corals, you assure some part of the livelihoods of the people that is there, like the food and other things that make them more resilient. The other project that we are working on is one of the first blue carbon projects on globally in Bahía de Cispatá. And this one has really a high social impact, since 18 communities are working around these blue carbon projects, not only protecting the mangroves, but getting the most of it, from wood to some other ecosystem services in a sustainable manner. So these two projects, we want them to scale them up. We want these projects to scale them up, and we are thinking to get these blue carbon projects to expand it to the Cartagena area, in which we are doing this restoration plan for the Bay of Cartagena. And we want to include also urban mangroves. And it should be really important how we came up with a solution to work with urban mangroves, since Cartagena has like a really high vulnerability, since Cartagena is not only the sea level is rising, but the city is, how do you say that in English? I don't know, but the city is sinking, yeah. So at least 1 centimeter per year in the combination of those two phenomena, we have it in Cartagena. So urban mangroves will help a lot in Cartagena on how we do adaptive measures. And we want to bring this blue carbon project to Cartagena in order to protect all these mangrove areas as well. Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much. Then, Rosa, do you have examples regarding adaptation mostly, or mitigation for coastal zones?
Yes. I was very happy to hear Henry saying about this working they are trying to do to prioritize adaptation projects, because that's what our country needs a lot. And yes, in Ecuador we have some projects that we are implementing in the coastal area. One of them that I would like to mention is one that we are implementing with CAF. And this is to prevent floods and landslides. This was a current problem in this area. And through this program, we are implementing adaptation measures, nature-based measures, green and gray infrastructure measures. And this project is being very well going in the area, because the impacts of these measures for these communities and how they are improving their lives. No? It also has this approach of gender and how to improve the life of these vulnerable groups. So this project is being a very good example of what we can do in adaptation in the communities, in the coastal areas. And also we have some projects that are focused in the local planning. That is, they are having good results that we're implementing in the coastal. Working with, we have worked also with the restoration and conservation of the mangroves, and I think this part of the projects are being well received for the population. Yes.
Okay, thank you very much, Rosa. And well, uh, we have talked about how the GCF is supporting the countries, what is the vulnerability aspects for both of the countries in coastal areas, what are the programs or projects that now are developing, but to end the conversation, I would like to know what our CAF is a development bank where all of the three countries are part or members. We are a accredited entity to the GCF, the Adaptation Fund, to the Global Environmental Facility. And then what would you expect from CAF to support you? I don't know if you are, do you have that in mind or have you been thinking? But well, CAF, well, I could say CAF wants to work for you, what are you expecting from CAF?
I'm happy to respond to that. And I think that some of what we heard earlier really aligns well with well, what we were hoping to hear. So I think that a focus on adaptation where adaptation is needed, I think would be a first priority. And I spoke about SIDS and our adaptation needs being greater as, you know, not being significant contributors to climate change. So the focus on adaptation is welcome. And I think that, you know, I was interested in that discussion earlier around the importance of adaptation being country-driven and programs and projects being country-driven versus a need to still have some standardization and some efficiency through regional and multi-country projects. And I think that's a really important and interesting line that we need to walk. So I see the value of standardization in some instances, and I see the value of regional and multi-country projects where they're valid. But I think that we need to walk that line carefully and understand that the wider Caribbean, that Latin America and the Caribbean is not nearly as homogenous as it is often perceived by the rest of the world. You know, for the insular Caribbean, people see a lot of little small islands and think that we're all the same, and we're really not in terms of our physical geography, our human geography, our societies. There are nuances that are important in terms of how we develop projects and what's important to us in that theory of change. And so I think that's drilling down a bit more into that and how we carefully walk that line and critically unpack where do we need standardization versus where do we need that unique country-driven, and how can we bring the standardization and the efficiency without compromising the other. I think also that we need to maintain a data and science-driven approach. Sometimes there's a tendency to want to fund the shovel-ready projects, and that's great, but we're not always sitting around with shovel-ready projects. You know, we need those studies and that data to help us to define the implementations and design them for our specific context and our specific needs. And we've had a number of programs in Barbados that have incorporated both data collection, baseline studies, planning, and implementation. And so that by bringing that together, we ensure coherence across those things rather than jumping forward sometimes without the science. And so those are my main concerns.
Okay, thank you very much, Karima. And Alex, from Colombia, what are the expectations or the requirements for CAF as a development bank?
So in Colombia, we have a scientific research institute called INVEMAR. And INVEMAR has helped us a lot to understand about our marine and coastal areas in Colombia. However, I think we can enhance and strengthen the work that INVEMAR has been doing in Colombia and on the understanding of the different problems that our coastal and marine areas has in Colombia. I think other important part is research institute and the environmental sector knows how maybe know how to deal and the importance of adaptation and mitigation measures due to the whole research we have been doing. But there is a need to work with the local governments, like mayors of these cities, that they don't maybe understand the importance of a system like natural-based solutions, and they prefer always great solutions to any kind of problem that we can face. So there is a need to increase capacity on the local government to understand these problems, and I think like CAF should like and can help in these on resources to enhance this capacity on local authorities' capacity. But also these kind of solutions, natural-based solutions as the mangrove farming and the coral farming needs long-term, really long-term. There are long-term solutions that really needs resources for many years, and you won't get the profitability, if you can say it like that, in the short term. So we need, this kind of investment institutions to take into account that the business model of these natural-based solutions are long-term ones, and that's why we also need some support on that. And just finally, we have to make the case of, for example, payment for ecosystem services in coastal areas, because we have these communities that before they make up their living with fisheries, and many of these areas fisheries has decreased a lot, and we can give them some options under the payment for ecosystem services model, where they can look up and they can, at some point be stewards of these ecosystems, and they can perceive some resources from the ecosystem services and the payment for ecosystem services that we can that they steward for. So I think there are many opportunities at the local level, with the government, with the communities, and with the projects as well.
Okay, thank you very much, Alex. Maria Rosa.
Maria Rosa. You always change my name.
Rosa Ana.
Yes. Yes, I was going to speak about the payments for ecosystem service as well. But I think one thing that we're missing is the strengthening of information to implement adaptation. As Henry mentioned in his intervention, the climate rationale is is an issue for all our countries, and I think that could be a very good example of what you guys can do to help to develop the projects. As well, for us, I was sad that he left, but he spoke also about the Readiness Program, and as Ecuador, we accessed to our readiness for the formulation of our national adaptation plan. But now we have a gap about the implementation. How are you going to implement these strategies? So that is a thing that we could talk about the adaptation lack of finance that we have in our countries, and how you can support to enhance adaptation in the region.
Okay, thank you very much to the three of you. I'm going to close this panel with 3 small quotes. One is climate rational data, information, INVEMAR, INAMI, that should be strengthened. Country-driven, definitely. I think from my perspective, I also consider that the difference between countries, it has to be developed and stay like that. And most in adaptation. It's not the same to do a project in Barbados or in Trinidad and Tobago or in Galapagos or San Andres or Providencia or in or Cartagena. And I think to start working with the private sector, payment of ecosystem services, that may be one of these paths to start working with them. So thank you very much, everybody, for your time, for the panel. And I know everybody is in negotiations, and today is a critical day. So thank you very much again.
Muchas gracias, Carolina. Okay, yeah.